The door you can't open. Think about this. The moments in your life when everything felt within reach. A job opportunity, a creative project, a relationship that could have changed everything. You didn't just imagine the future. You could almost taste it. It lived under your skin, vibrating with certainty. And then, something inside you pulled the brake. You hesitated. You delayed. You walked away. Why? That moment when you're standing in front of the metaphorical door, hand on the handle, and suddenly, you freeze. That is self-sabotage, not laziness, not bad luck, not a lack of talent or preparation, but an internal force, subtle, invisible, that seems to rise just as you're about to move forward. It's like reaching for light after holding your breath underwater, only to feel your own hand pulling you back down. A loop. It's a strange familiarity, like you've lived this moment, this hesitation before, and no matter how much you grow, it finds you again. And the worst part, you know it's you. You're the one pulling back, and you still can't stop it. This is the paradox of self-sabotage. You want to change. You want to succeed. But something within you disagrees, and it's not asking for permission. We label it self-sabotage, as if it's a flaw in discipline. But what if it's not a flaw, but a strategy? But what if it's not just poor discipline or low motivation? What if what's holding you back is something far more ancient, far more intelligent, and far more deeply embedded in your psyche than you've ever imagined? Carl Jung, one of the greatest minds in psychology, believed that these patterns stem from a hidden realm within the human mind, a place he called the unconscious. And until we make the unconscious conscious, we are not driving our lives. We are being driven by forces we can't see. So the question is, what's operating behind the curtain of your mind? What part of you is afraid of the very thing you say you want? To answer that, we have to step into a space few are willing to explore. A space Jung dedicated his entire life to mapping, the realm of the unconscious. And that's where our journey begins. The unconscious, the mind behind the curtain. To understand self-sabotage, we must begin not with the conscious mind, but with what lies beneath it. Deeper than your goals, deeper than your intentions. Beneath all that lives the unconscious. Carl Jung didn't treat the unconscious as a vague abstraction. To him, it was a real psychological system, vast, structured, intelligent in its own way. It is the part of you that thinks without asking for your permission, the part that feels before you have time to speak, the part that decides before your logic can respond. It holds repressed memories, unprocessed emotions, unexamined beliefs. It stores every moment of humiliation, of shame, of pain, not to punish you, but to protect you from feeling them again. Picture this. Your mind is like an iceberg. Above the water, you see your conscious thoughts, your goals, plans, and reasoning. But below the surface is a vast landscape of influences you can't see. This is the unconscious, and it writes more lines in your life script than you ever consciously approve. Let's bring this into focus. Say there's someone who keeps sabotaging their success. Every time an opportunity arrives, a new job, a promotion, a relationship, they retreat. They tell themselves they're not ready, that it's not the right time, that they need just a little more preparation. But deep down, They feel it. Something inside them doesn't want to move forward. It's as if they're stuck in a loop they didn't create. This isn't weakness. This is psychological protection in action. Somewhere in that person's past, success may have been linked to risk, to judgment, to punishment. And so the unconscious does what it's programmed to do, keep them safe. Even if that safety comes at the cost of their potential. This is the core misunderstanding. Self-sabotage is not a failure of will. It's not laziness. It's a misalignment between the conscious and the unconscious. Your conscious mind says, I want growth, but the unconscious whispers, growth isn't safe. And here's the kicker, the unconscious almost always wins. Jung taught that the unconscious is not just a vault of forgotten memories. It's a second operating system, one that prioritizes emotional survival over external success. That's why even the most disciplined, driven people still fall into patterns they can't seem to break. Because these patterns aren't just habits, they are protective strategies crafted long ago. In moments of fear, rejection, or trauma, imagine a child who spoke their truth and was shamed for it. That child might grow up to be someone who always hesitates to speak, even when they have something valuable to say. Not because they lack intelligence, but because their unconscious still associates honesty with danger. So yes, your unconscious is smart. It learns fast, and it never forgets. But here's the hopeful part. It can also unlearn. It can adapt. It can evolve if you become aware of its scripts. Awareness is the key. You cannot change what you refuse to see, and the unconscious thrives in your blind spots. This is why Jung emphasized the importance of making the unconscious conscious, because until you do, it will steer your life, and you will call it fate. Let's pause here for a moment. What are some behaviors in your life that seem to come from nowhere? What do you keep doing, despite knowing better? Those moments hold clues. They are fingerprints left by your unconscious. Now, to be clear, the unconscious isn't sabotaging you. It's defending a version of you that was once in danger. It's loyal, but it's loyal to your past. Left unexamined, those protections harden into walls, not around your heart, but around your future. So how do you begin to work with it? First, and you stop judging your patterns. You observe them. You ask, what are you trying to protect me from? What belief are you holding on to for my sake? And most importantly, is that belief still true? This is not easy work. It requires self-honesty. It requires slowing down, paying attention, and listening inward, not to what you want to hear, but to what you've always avoided. Because the unconscious doesn't speak in words. It speaks in feelings, in hesitations, in reactions that don't make sense until they do. Now here's where things get deeper. The unconscious doesn't just contain old emotions or forgotten memories. It also contains something Jung saw as even more central and even more difficult to face. A hidden force. The parts of yourself you've disowned. The traits you reject. The impulses you deny. The emotions you suppress. Jung called this force the shadow. And in the next part of this journey, we're going to shine a light on that shadow. We'll explore how it forms, how it lives within you, and how it silently sabotages everything you consciously desire. Ready to go deeper? Let's begin. The shadow, the mirror you refuse to look into. If the unconscious is the landscape beneath our awareness, then the shadow is its most hidden terrain, the dark mirror we avoid looking into. Carl Jung defined the shadow as the part of the psyche that contains everything we've repressed, rejected, or disowned. Not because it's evil, but because at some point in our lives, we learned that these parts of us were unacceptable. They might be anger, jealousy, désir, pride, or even strength, if we were taught that being strong meant being too much. And so, we bury them, not consciously, but subtly, slowly, and over time, we create an internal image of who we think we're supposed to be, and everything that doesn't fit that image gets cast into the dark. But here's the catch. Just because we hide these traits doesn't mean they disappear. In fact, they grow stronger in the shadows. Jung famously said, "What we resist persists." And nowhere is this more evident than in the power of the shadow. Think about a time you overreacted, snapped at someone out of nowhere, or felt a sudden wave of shame or envy that you didn't fully understand. It's as if something rose up inside you, took over, and vanished again. That is often the voice of the shadow, speaking in behavior when we refuse to listen to emotion. The shadow doesn't sabotage us out of spite. It acts out because it has no other way to be heard. Imagine it like this: a psychological mirror, one that reflects not who you pretend to be, but who you really are, beneath the performance. And for most of us, that mirror is hard to face, because it contains the exiled truths we were too young or too afraid to hold. Here's the truth. Everyone has a shadow. There is no fully enlightened self without darkness. In fact, the greater the light, the darker the shadow it casts. And the more we refuse to see what's inside it, the more likely it is to show up through our actions in ways we don't understand, can't control, and often regret. Have you ever asked yourself, why did I say that? Why do I keep doing this? Why do I always push people away when I crave closeness? Those aren't random flaws. They're echoes from the past, whispering louder each time you ignore them. And the longer you ignore them, the louder they become. Here's something worth reflecting on. What part of yourself would you be most ashamed of if others could see it? That's where your shadow often lives. Sometimes it's a wound. Sometimes a memory. Sometimes a strength you've been taught to suppress. But always, it's you. Just a part you haven't made peace with yet. And this is where Jung's brilliance shines through. He didn't tell us to fight the shadow. He taught us to integrate it. Because until we do, we remain divided, consciously pursuing one thing, while unconsciously pulling ourselves in the opposite direction. That's self-sabotage, in its purest form, a war within the self. And that war creates symptoms like procrastination, perfectionism, impulse control issues, and emotional volatility. Not because you're broken, but because a part of you is trying to protect another part of you from being hurt again. That's the paradox. The shadow is made of the things we feared as children, but carry into adulthood as armor. And now, that armor is too heavy to keep wearing. So what do? The first step is awareness. You can't heal what you don't name. And you can't integrate what you refuse to face. Start by noticing your triggers, the moments that provoke strong reactions, disproportionate to the situation. What do they reveal about what's living in your shadow? Notice your projections. The traits you judge harshly in others often reflect what you've disowned in yourself. And then, be radically honest. Ask, what am I pretending not to feel? What am I trying to prove by overcompensating? What emotion do I judge myself for most? This process takes courage, but it also brings immense clarity. Because when you turn toward the shadow, you begin to reclaim the parts of you that hold power, truth, and authenticity. Your anger might be hiding your boundaries. Your jealousy might be revealing what you truly value. Your fear might be pointing to the exact path you need to walk. And here's the secret. Jung left us with shadow work. It's not about becoming good. It's about becoming whole. And wholeness requires contradiction. It means allowing yourself to be layered, complex, and even contradictory without shame. Because only when you embrace all that you are, can you stop fighting against yourself. And only then can you begin to move through life with integrity. Now, if the shadow is the part of you that holds what you've rejected, then what happens when those rejections are tied to deep, unresolved emotional wounds? That's when the shadow fuses with something even more entangled, even more emotionally charged. What Jung called a complex. And in the next part of this journey, we'll explore exactly how those complexes form and why they often become the psychological knots that keep you reliving the same patterns again and again. Let's keep going. Complexes, the emotional knots you keep repeating. So far, we've explored the unconscious mind and the shadow. Now it's time to meet one of the most powerful forces operating beneath your awareness. The complex. Carl Jung used the term complex to describe clusters of emotionally charged experiences tied together by memory, meaning, and unresolved emotion. These are not just thoughts. They are living systems inside the psyche with their own energy, reactions, and momentum. A complex forms when something painful happens, but you don't have the tools or the safety to fully process it. Instead of being integrated, the experience fragments and gets stored in the unconscious. But it doesn't just sit there passively. It waits, and it acts, often when you least expect it. Let's look at an example. Imagine someone who grew up constantly being compared to others, told they were never quite enough. Every effort was met with, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" Or almost, but not quite. Over time, that person develops a failure complex. Even when they do well, it never feels like enough. And when a big opportunity appears, their mind floods with doubt. They hesitate, they procrastinate, or worse, they give up before even trying. But here's the key. It's not just a lack of confidence. It's a complex reactivating a network of emotions tied to early pain. And until it's brought to the surface, it will keep shaping their behavior, no matter how much they try to change. Now let's go deeper. Not all complexes revolve around failure. Some are rooted in abandonment. Someone who felt emotionally neglected or dismissed as a child might develop an abandonment complex. They cling to relationships, even unhealthy ones, or push people away preemptively, terrified of being left again. Then there's the perfection complex, often born in homes where love was conditional on performance. These individuals equate worth with flawlessness. Any mistake triggers panic, shame, or self-attack. They don't just fear failure. They fear what failure means about who they are. This is the essence of a complex. It doesn't just cause discomfort. It hijacks identity. It rewrites the present using the emotions of the past. And that's why it's so powerful. The present is just the stage, but the actors, the fear, the shame, the reaction belong to a much older script. something familiar, something unresolved. This is why Jung's insight is so critical here. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. These emotional knots are not your destiny. They're unexamined history, repeating itself." So how do you break the pattern before it becomes your identity? The first step is awareness. You start by observing moments when your emotional response feels disproportionate. Ask yourself, is this about what's happening, or about something older? Is this a real threat, or a remembered one? Is this fear based in the present, or echoing from the past? That space between reaction and reflection is where transformation begins. One powerful tool: journaling. But not just any journaling. Specifically, write down moments where your emotional response surprised you. Ask, what triggered me? What did this situation remind me of? Who or what from my past does this feeling belong to? Over time, patterns begin to emerge. You start to see the blueprint, the structure of your own complex. And once it's in the light, you're no longer trapped by it. Because a complex loses power the moment you witness it with awareness. When you stop being in it and start observing from outside it, you reclaim agency. Now, let's be clear. This work isn't always comfortable. Complexes are often rooted in shame, grief, or trauma. Facing them can stir intense emotions. But that is also where the healing begins. Because behind every complex is a part of you still waiting to be seen, understood, and integrated. And this brings us to a turning point in our journey. Awareness is not the end. It's the threshold. Knowing that a complex is active is powerful, but change only comes when you engage it, when you meet it with curiosity, not condemnation, when you choose to respond differently, even when every part of you wants to follow the old pattern. So far, we've named the shadow. We've identified the complex. Now it's time to explore what Jung called the tools of transformation, the practical, powerful methods he developed to work with the unconscious mind directly. Because understanding why you're stuck is only the beginning. The real breakthrough happens when you learn how to walk yourself out of the pattern, step by conscious step. Let's go there next. Tools for transformation. How to unbind the self. Once you've brought the shadow into awareness, once you've named the complexes influencing your life, the next question is both simple and profound. Now, what awareness alone is powerful, yes, but transformation requires more than insight. It demands engagement. It asks you to show up again and again differently. Carl Jung didn't just map the psyche. He offered tools for navigating it, practical methods for working with the unconscious mind, so that the patterns you uncover don't just inform you, they free you. One of the most powerful tools he developed was called active imagination. In essence, active imagination is the practice of entering into dialogue with the unconscious. You step into a silent ritual pen, image, or vision in hand, not to fix what's broken, but to meet what's been waiting, to give voice to what has been silent, to allow repressed parts of the psyche to express themselves, not through breakdowns or projection, but through creative conversation. Imagine closing your eyes and allowing a buried emotion to take form. You see it, you name it, and then you listen to it. You ask, why are you here? What do you need from me? This is not fantasy. It's psychological integration. Because when you engage the unconscious directly, you make space for healing to happen on its terms. Another essential method Jung championed was dream analysis. He believed dreams were the royal road to the unconscious symbols, stories, and metaphors that reveal what the ego refuses to see. Start by keeping a dream journal. Write down what you remember, no matter how fragmented or strange. Then, reflect. What emotion was dominant? Who appeared? And why? What symbols repeated? Often, what shows up in dreams is what has been exiled from waking consciousness. And by decoding that language, you begin to invite those parts back into dialogue. But awareness and inner conversation are only part of the path. The unconscious also lives in your body, in your reactions, in the way you move through daily life. Which brings us to a third, equally important approach: conscious disruption. If the unconscious thrives on repetition, then one of the most direct ways to challenge it is to do the opposite of what the pattern expects. If your usual reaction is to withdraw, lean in. If your instinct is to avoid the hard conversation, start it. If perfection keeps you paralyzed, try doing something messy. On purpose. This isn't about being impulsive. It's about being intentional. Choosing, moment by moment, to interrupt your old script. Every small, conscious act becomes a signal, rewriting the code of who you believe you are. We're not living in that old story anymore. And the more you repeat these conscious disruptions, the more flexible your inner world becomes. Another tool worth practicing is what I call emotional pattern journaling. It's simple. Every time you feel overwhelmed, triggered, or emotionally activated, pause. Write down 3 things. What happened? What did I feel? Where have I felt this? Before patterns will start to emerge, not just in what you feel, but when, how, and why you feel it. This isn't just journaling. It's pattern recognition. And with recognition comes choice. You go from reacting blindly to responding with clarity. And here's what ties all of this together: self-compassion. This work is not about perfection. It's about presence. You are not here to fix yourself. You are here to meet yourself more fully. Every complex you untangle, every shadow you embrace, every choice you make against the gravity of your conditioning is an act of courage. So let me ask you, are you willing to try something new, even if it's small? Even if it's uncomfortable, in service of who you're becoming? Because that moment, when you choose awareness over autopilot, courage over comfort, is when true transformation begins. And it's from here that we move toward the deeper journey Jung devoted his life to. Not just healing, but becoming whole. Individuation. The sacred process of integrating the conscious and unconscious self so that you are no longer divided within. In our final chapter, we'll explore this process in full and how it leads not just to personal clarity, but to the deepest sense of meaning a human being can experience. Let's take that step. Individuation, the journey back to wholeness. What if the greatest journey of your life was not out into the world, but inward, not toward achievement or validation, but toward integration? Carl Jung called this path individuation, the process of becoming whole. Not perfect, not ideal, but whole. At its core, individuation is the reconciliation of opposites, the conscious and the unconscious, the light and the shadow, the mask you wear, and the self you've buried underneath it. This is not a spiritual concept floating in abstraction. It's a psychological reality, grounded in the tension you feel every day. You want love, but you're afraid of vulnerability. You crave freedom, but cling to control. You seek authenticity, but fear being seen. These inner conflicts are not signs of failure. They are the very material of transformation. Jung called this dynamic holding the tension of opposites, not choosing one side over the other, but holding both without collapsing into reaction. Imagine standing in the middle of a storm, not running, not hiding, but breathing through it, watching it dissolve into clarity. That's individuation. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about becoming who you already are, beneath the programming, beneath the wounds, beneath the roles you've had to play. And here's the paradox. You don't find your true self by chasing it. You uncover it by facing everything that isn't you. That includes your shadow, your complexes, your coping mechanisms, your inherited beliefs. So, how do we bring this into practice? Start by giving form to what's been formless. Write a letter to your shadow. Draw the shape of your fear. Speak out loud the thoughts you usually silence. You might be surprised by what speaks back. And if you listen long enough, you'll notice something profound. There's a voice underneath the chaos, a calm, centered awareness. It doesn't react. It doesn't panic. It simply knows. This is the self, not the ego, not the wounded child, not the idealized mask, but the integrated core of your being. And when you begin living from this center, everything shifts. You no longer need to prove your worth. You stop seeking external permission to be yourself. You no longer run from discomfort. You use it as a compass. The stillness arrives, not because chaos ends, but because you no longer confuse it with your truth. This is what it means to be free. Not free from pain, but free from unconscious reactivity. Joseph Campbell once said, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." And individuation is the courage to walk into that cave, Dortchenhund, and face what's inside. Because here's the truth. You are not broken. You are divided. And wholeness isn't something to achieve. It's something to remember. Every fear you confront, every emotion you integrate, every shadow you reclaim, brings you back. Back to self. Back to clarity. Back to power. So, let me ask you, now that you've seen the shadow, named your complexes, and witnessed the unconscious, will you take the final step? Will you walk through the cave and stay with yourself long enough to become whole? Because no one can walk it for you. But if you do, you will emerge not just changed, but truly, unmistakably. You were the key all along. Maybe the most powerful truth is the one that's hardest to accept. You were never broken. You were never missing pieces. You've simply been forgetting. For so long, we search outside for answers, for healing, for someone to save us. But the truth is, quieter, simpler, deeper. The door you couldn't open was never locked. You were the key all along. The shadow you feared, it's a part of you, waiting to be seen, not rejected. The complex you carried, a wound, yes, but also a map. You don't need to be perfect. You only need to be whole. Start small. Write to your shadow. Note the dreams that visit you. Pause when emotion rises and ask, is this an echo from the past or a message for my future? Because the moment you begin to listen, really listen, the unconscious begins to respond. And slowly, layer by layer, you come home. Maybe The person you've been searching for all this time is you undivided, awake, and ready to return.